Hi, I'm Li Hao. So we have seen how we can use application state libraries like Redux, Xstate, Veltio, and use them in a Svelte application. And by making them following the Svelte store contract, we allow us to use a $prefix variable to access the value of the store or the state, depending on which library you're using. And today we are going to look at one more library, which is Immer.js. So Immer allows us to make an object to become like an immutable object, allow us to work with immutable states with a very convenient API. So right now I'm at its documentation. It says that it's based on a copy on write mechanism. I'm not really sure what it means, but a basic idea is that you have a current object and then you can apply changes to a temporary draft. So over here you have a draft object which you make changes on there. You can make mutations, but it will not affect your current object. And then once all the mutations are complete, you can apply all of them and create and gives you a next state. So current and the next are immutable. You don't change them and you only change the draft. So this allows you to make changes, make mutations, easy mutations, while still keeping, making sure that current and next are still immutable. So let's take a quick look at like the API of Immer.js. So over here you import produce, and you have a base state, and you call produce with the base state, which in this case is the current state, and then it gives you a draft state. So you can make changes on a draft state any way you like. For example, pushing a new item to the array or marking some object as done. And when it returns, this whole produce, when this function ends, and then you will be returned by this produce, will gives you a new next state. And you can ensure that the base state is unchanged. Everything in base state is still the same. Everything in next state is already changed. So if you keep the snapshot of base state and next state, you're kind of able to time travel to the previous state or the current state. So we're going to take a look at how we're going to use it in the Svelte. And I have already prepared a simple example over here in the Svelte REPL. So over here, I have a state with two users, user 1 and user 2, which has a different first name and last name. So, and over here, when I'm going to change the name, I use Immer.js produce. So I say produce with the current states, and then I give us a draft state, and I can mutate the draft state anywhere I like it, and it will return me a next state. So same thing goes with all the last name, and over here I copy and paste all this for over 4 inputs, and as you can see here, over here I'm going to show the states user 1 or user 2 the first name and last name. So when I type something, say I'm going to say hello, then this will be changed immediately, right? And because it's immutable, you are not, if we keep a reference of the previous state and then the next current state, actually they are different objects. And so if you compare, for example, previous states equals to current state, what you can see is that, so initially they are all true, but when you change something, you can see that the previous state and the next state is two different objects. We are not mutating on the same object. Compared by reference, they are actually different. And one great thing about Immer is also that it will make sure that if you're only changing user 1, then only a new object created for user 1. But the user 2 reference, since we are not changing it, it's still referencing the same object. So previous state user 2 equals to current state user 2 is still the same, right? So if I change anywhere I like, this is still true. And if I change user 2, you can see that now user 1 is always the same, right? The reference of the object is still always the same. So this is Immer. And let's take a look how we can convert it into a Svelte store by following a Svelte store contract. So first thing is I'm going to create a function. I will say get Immer star, and I'm going to pass in an object. So over here, there's two things. One is actually the draft, right? The draft state, and which we can change it directly. And the next thing is the state. So it feels like we can have like a two-store approach where we have a draft store and a current store, the state store. So if we can have a draft as a store, we can make changes to it directly. And then for the base store, the states tree is another store. Once when we are done with all the changes, we can get a new state, and this will get updated to it. It sounds complicated. I'm not quite sure, but let's take a look over here, right? So how do we get a draft? So from what I can see over here, let's take a look at all the APIs. There's a create draft. Probably we can use it. We can use a create draft. Let's take a look over here. Create draft. So we can create a draft out of an object. Can make all the changes we want, and then we call finish draft, which returns us a new. Hopefully this is a new user, right? Which is a new state. Okay, so let's create two stores. So first is the draft store, which is an object, and the state store, which is an object. So a store is an object that follows the store contract. And if you can still remember, the store contract says that you need to implement the subscribe method, which takes in a function. So I'm going to implement that. And the subscribe method should be called, the function being passed in the subscribe method should be called immediately. So over here, I'm going to call immediately, but I haven't figured out what to call, what value to be passed in. For the states, I think we just pass in this, right? And then for the draft, okay, so let's create a variable. So let's states equals to object, and let's draft equals to create draft object or state. So I'm going to import create draft from Immer and also finish draft. So since I use state variable, I just use states. So this is the draft. So the function has to be called immediately, and then you need to return a function to unsubscribe your store. So I need to return a function, which means that I need to keep track of the function. So probably let's create an array over here. So draft subscribers. We make it a set so that it's easier to take in and remove. So same thing for the state subscribers. So I'm gonna say add function, and over here I'm gonna say delete function. So same thing goes. Come up here. Whoops. State subscribers. Then return a function that I delete the function. Right. So okay. So we have a subscribe method. Take in a function. Call the function synchronously. Return the unsubscribe method. Everything looks fine. And then optionally, you can have a set method. So I'm going to implement it for the draft because we can set something on the draft. So value. So hopefully this is like the new value, but I'm not quite sure. So a new draft, right? Not quite sure how we're going to use it. For now, I'm going to say to do. But we're going to not change, we're going to not allow to set anything on the state. because it's meant to be immutable. It's meant to be readable only. So okay, we are done with here, and I'm gonna return this to gonna return an array of states store and the draft store. So outside over here, I am gonna since over here, I'm gonna call this states and draft. Let's say create Immer star. Okay, so we still use states over here. So to get the value of the state, probably is like dollar prefix because it follows. Hold on, I think I name it Immer star. Because it follows a store contract, we can use a dollar prefix variable to access the value of the store. So over here, we can access it with dollar states. Same thing goes from here and here. And over here, what we want to do, okay, here I think state as well. But over here, what we want to do differently is that we want to actually use the draft store to actually change it. So we do this over here. I think we remove this as well. Right, over here as well, draft store. Over here. Okay, draft store. Let's see. I think this is irrelevant now. Let's uncomment this for now. Okay, let's type something. It's not updated because we changed the draft. So this is hopefully this is going to be called. So I'm gonna say console log value over here. This is being called. I think it's an object. It's a draft object so that you can't see it, but it's being called. So over here, what we need to do is that we will have to finish the draft and then get the new state, but not immediately. We can do it in a debounce way. So which means is that we can allow setting multiple times over, and then we update the states at once, right? So we're just gonna set like a set timeout. Set timeout. And over here we are saying finish draft value. Okay, so this should be the value. So this is the new state. So I'm gonna say state equals to this, and then draft. Since it's already finished, we're gonna create a new draft. So draft here state, and then I need to notify all the subscribers. So I'm gonna come over here, draft subscribers dot for each, and call it with the draft object, and do the same thing for the state subscribers. Call it with the new state, and we want to debounce this, right? So okay, so timeout, we're gonna say let's say for 500 milliseconds only we change it, and we want to debounce this, meaning if you type it multiple times, we're not gonna like 5 times. We're gonna not set 5 timeouts and trigger this like in sequence 5 times. We're actually gonna cancel the previous timeout. So you type 5 times, and then only the last one will wait for 500 milliseconds and then trigger. So all the changes are batched in one go. So over here, I'm gonna get the timeout ID equals null. So if timeout ID then we're gonna clear timeout. So this is gonna clear the previous timeout. And then if we did successfully trigger a timeout, then we set it to null, then we're not gonna clear timeout, right? So here, I'm gonna declare the timeout ID. And let's take a look at what we have done so far. So over here, I'm gonna change something, and in 500 milliseconds, this is gonna be updated. So if you feel it's a bit slow, it sets it to 100. Sorry. And let's type, right? It fills immediately. So what have we achieved so far? We've make it like a store contract that allows us to use the set method to like update the draft immediately. But what's good about using Immer? Does it like justify all this extra piece of code? So I'm going to show you something called immutability, right? So for example, hopefully because that over here when we see that if after updates the previous state is not changed, then if previous state for user 1 is not changed, you can see that it's not updated, right? So over here, what we want to do something similar as well. Gonna say previous state is equals to the value of the state. And come over here, we can compare it again. And we can see that because of immutability, this is referring to the same, still referring to the same object. This is false, this is true. So which means that this object itself is not created a new object, right? The reference of the object is still the same. But because of how Svelte works, if you have a reactive declaration and if you try to console out, say state user 1, this is gonna be called every time, even if you're not updating it, right? You kind of expect that this, since it's the same, you shouldn't console out anymore, right? But because of how Svelte works is that as long as the state is the same, is different, then this will be called. So because this is always going to be false, if we're going to update something, then yeah, then it's too bad for us. So we can use something called derive from Svelte store, which we can try to derive a new store out of the current store. So for example, I'm going to come here. This is a lot of boilerplate code. It's meant for just for your example education purpose. You don't have to do this for a very simple application, but just bear with me. Let me show you like what this will leads us to. Right. So over here I can create two derived stores. So one is the user 1. I'm deriving from the store the states, and then can return the value, which is state.user1. So this gives us a new store, which is the user1 is a derived store. So this is giving us a new store by creating like coming out from deriving from another store, which is the whole state, and give us the state.user1, right? And so this user1 is another store, and we can create another store called user2. And over here, let's try console out again. So in this time round, you kind of hope that this shouldn't be, user 1 shouldn't be called again if we are updating user 2, and user 2 shouldn't be called when we're trying to update user 1. So let's see if that holds true. So I'm going to type something over here. But too bad, user 1 and user 2 is still being called. Yeah, so it's kind of like, what's the point? Like even if you know that user 1 is still the same object, you like by using Immer, we make sure that it's exactly the same object. We don't change it, we don't mutate it, but it's still that it's still telling us that user1 has changed. Well, that's because by default, Svelte allows you to mutate objects directly. It does not know that you are trying to do something immutable. So any changes to an object, anything that they assume that has changes to an object is a change, and you will try to console this out, right? Meaning even if it does not actually check whether it's a strict referential equality, it just says that, oh, if this is an object, then I assume that it has changed. Because you can mutate it and the object reference is still the same, and we have no way to know that whether it's a change or not. So any object, when you kind of feel that it's changed, and because in user1 we feel that it has changed because state has changed, so user1 probably has changed, and because of that, we're gonna re-execute this statement, and we do it for this as well. And I have said that this is because you can Svelte assumes that you are trying to make things, you're gonna try to mutate an object, and if you can tell Svelte that we're not gonna mutate any object, whatever we do over here, we're gonna make any state changes over here are gonna be immutable, then you can use a strict equality, referential equality to compare an object. If it's exactly the same, then you can assume that no changes has been made. Don't have to assume that, you can assume that no changes has been made. You don't have to do that weird stuff that assumes that as long as an object, you kind of assume something has changed. So what that means is that you can use, you try to tell Svelte it is immutable. And how do we do that? We can use a Svelte option called immutable true. This tells Svelte that any changes made in any state is going to be immutable. So you use so if user1 if they are referring to the and every changes when you see on user1, if they are still the same exact object, triple equals the same, then it has no changes, because if you're going to make a changes, it's gonna be a new object. So let's come back over here and let's try to type something. Immediately you can see something's different now. When you change on user1, user2 is no longer console log anymore. If you change on user2, we don't see any console log on user1 anymore, right? So Immer.js has helped us to create a new immutable object over here. And because of Immer.js, we can still make changes like they are immutable, because we are mutating the draft object. We are mutating the draft state. And whenever, once we have changed something on the draft state, the sets method of the draft store will be called, and we debounce it just for performance sake. We debounce it. And once, and then we notify that, okay, all these changes that you have made on the draft state should be applied, and use it as should be applied, and then you create a new immutable state, right? So this is like finish the draft and you create a new immutable state. And because it's immutable, we are not changing the previous state. The reference, if there's changes, the reference to that object will be different, because we're gonna create a new object. So over here, if you change user2, you only see console log of user2. User1 is always the same reference object. There's no changes, so you don't see a console log of it there. And we also have to tell Svelte that when we make changes, we actually make changes immutably. So by passing in an options called immutable equals to true. So before we end this, let me show you one more thing that you can do with Immer, which is in Immer, you can have patches. So to enable patches, we need to enable it first. I'm gonna come over here and paste these two lines over here. So we enable patches. And with patches, we can we can apply patches, right? What that means is that I think in the finish draft method, we actually can pass in a callback, and there's two parameters. One is the changes, one is the inverse changes. So changes is that the changes that you can apply to, which is the changes that is going to be applied to, and inverse changes is changes that you can unapply onto the states. So we can apply patch on the next state with the inverse change will give us the previous state. So this can actually helps us to create a undo and redo kind of interaction. So I'm just gonna save just the inverse changes, and I'm gonna come over here and push this into undo list. So I'm gonna have a variable called undo list, an array, and in the draft you can provide more methods, right? So you as long as you fulfill a store contract, you can actually implement more methods. It's up to you. As long as the subscribe is there, follows the store contract, and optionally set method is there and follows the store contract, that's good about that's good enough. So we can have an undo method, and in this undo method, I'm gonna check if undo list.length, which means there's something to undo. I'm gonna call undo.pop. Undo list.pop, and I'm gonna apply the patch. So apply patches onto the state with the undo. This should give me a new state which is still immutable. So I'm gonna say state equals to this, and I'm gonna say draft equals to create draft from the state, and I notify all the subscribers. So I'm gonna paste this over here. Okay, and let's try to use this undo method. So I'm gonna come over here, have a button on click undo, and I'm gonna come here and say draft.undo. This time around, I'm gonna call it on the draft store itself. Right, if the dollar prefix is getting you the state of the draft, but we're not gonna get the value of the draft store. We're gonna use the draft store itself. We're gonna call undo. So over here we have an undo button now. So if we type something, the changes has been made. Type something, changes has been made, and then we undo. Oh wait, undo is not working. Hold on. Apply patches is not defined. Sorry. Let's come back over here and import it. Okay, so make some changes, applied, make changes, applied, undo, undo. You can undo and yeah, you can apply patches from Immer.js. It will create. So when you use Immer.js, you can make changes on the draft states itself mutably, and then when you finish the drafts, it gives you the next state. Immutable next state, as well as the changes you have made in this draft, and you can apply the changes again, or you can inverse the changes. Right? There's a lot of more advanced stuff that you can do with Immer, which is probably very advanced where you when you are dealing with some sort of a complex kind of state. So I don't recommend you to immediately jump and use this in a very simple application. But as your application grows, you have a very big object and you want some immutability in your states, then probably you can take a look at Immer.js and take a look at how we can use Immer, make it like a store contract and use it in Svelte using the dollar prefix variable syntax. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, comments down below. And as always, remember to subscribe to my channel so that you get notified when the next video is up. So see ya, bye bye.